This morning, after months of preparation and diplomatic wrangling, US President Biden met his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in Geneva. The biggest takeaway here was that both sides agreed to begin dialogue on nuclear arms control. They also agreed to return ambassadors to each other's capitals. The envoys had been recalled in March, as you may recall, after the US accused Russia of meddling in the 2020 presidential election. But the status quo has remained unchanged for the host of other issues which were on the table. On cyber attacks, Putin brushed away accusations of Russian responsibility, instead said that most cyber attacks in Russia originated from the United States. Biden, on the other hand, told Putin that critical infrastructure like water and energy must be off limits to hacking and warned that US would retaliate if such norms were broken. However, in a promising sign here, both countries agreed to establish a task force on cyber attacks. And jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny also came up in these discussions. Of course, President Biden said that he had warned Putin of devastating consequences if Navalny died in prison. Putin, however, dismissed US concerns, saying that Navalny ignored the law and knew that he would be detained when he returned. As they were before the summit, no major breakthroughs occurred, but both leaders have acknowledged that the meeting had been constructive. And President Putin said that the two leaders spoke the same language and that the talks had been pragmatic and fruitful. Despite the positive spin, it is hard to say whether relations between the two countries will improve in the future. And WION correspondent Nick Harper is joining us live from Washington. Nick, thank you for joining us. Now, both sides agreed to begin dialogue on nuclear arms control. They also agreed to return ambassadors to each other's capitals. Now, of course, the status quo remains unchanged, but that was only expected, given that the relations have been tense for a while, and this is only the first such summit. What can you tell us about this?
Well, yes, it really only seems to be these 2 points that they've been able to agree on. This was certainly where there was a lot of show, but not much substance. Both leaders came out of it praising their performance within the meeting, but there didn't seem to be much progress, really, on many matters. But then again, we didn't expect that. Going into this, low expectations were put in place by both countries. So the ambassadors will be returning to the two capital cities, and they will be working out some sort of strategy to restart those stalled talks to look at the two countries' nuclear arsenals. But there is no word on timings for either of them. Joe Biden essentially said that really the proof would be in the pudding in the next few months. It could only be deemed a success in the next 3 to 6 months, he said, because at that stage we would see whether or not there had been any progress on those two things that they had agreed on. But there still was a huge gulf between the two leaders, rocky relations, and still plenty of issues that they simply do not agree on.
Right, Nick. As you said, these were the only 2 things that they actually did agree on. Now, there was also back and forth when it came to cyber attack accusations. Both countries agreed to now establish a task force on these attacks. How do you see this panning out?
Well, it's something that they said that they would put in place, but again, it's not exactly something out the back of the meeting that they've put out extensive press releases on exactly how this will happen. It's all very well saying that they want to do it, but they need to now work out essentially the rules of the road, how they will put that task force together. Because we saw straight off the back of that meeting in which they discussed this, Vladimir Putin at his solo press conference taking no responsibility for these cyber attacks, even though that's the very thing that Joe Biden wants him to do. So it is an area which is of significant concern to the US president, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure. You may remember a month or 2 back, the Colonial Pipeline was hit here in the United States, the biggest fuel pipeline disabled essentially because of a ransomware attack, which US intelligence said originated from Russia. So the US wants something to be done on it, but Russia, even though they agreed at the table that they would help to put this task force together, don't seem, at least within the last few hours, particularly willing at putting things concretely in place about how they would implement all of this.
Right, Nick. So I believe it's safe to say that this was only an icebreaker of sorts, and there aren't any concrete plan of actions in place. Now, another important point here would be that Navalny also came up during these discussions, and once again Putin has dismissed concerns. How do you see them moving forward from this?
Well, again, this is another huge area of concern for the Biden administration, something that really the new president has made central to his foreign policy mantra, that he will hold countries accountable when he thinks there are human rights abuses within those countries. And he says that there are plenty within Russia. The fact that they have essentially shut down the opposition, that they allegedly poisoned the opposition figurehead, Alexei Navalny, and when he returned after receiving care in Germany to Russia, he was arrested. He's been detained and he's now in prison, and there are fears for his health and safety. The US President Joe Biden said that if he were to die in prison, that would be detrimental to Russia's relationship, not just with the US, but the rest of the world. So there is concern. But again, it's another topic, like with cybercrime, that essentially the Russian president rebuffed, or at least seemed to, the US president on. When he was asked about it at his press conference, Putin again pushed back on this, didn't even mention Navalny by name. It was certainly no suggestion that he was ready to change the human rights record within Russia just after this one meeting with the US president.
Right. Okay, Nick, thank you so much for joining us with all those updates.